Alright, so this video is about adding a custom configuration management service and an HTTP service to our React app. As you can see here, we have a blog index and the data coming straight from the dev environment. As I have prefixed the data so that we can easily understand, it's actually denoting an environment. And if we look at our config service right here, the data that's coming from, and it's actually giving us not only the environment where it's coming from, but its API URL, password, how many per page, and username. Depending on that, our HTTP service is bringing in the data. So now let's go see where this data is coming from. I have three different environments set up here. WordPress backend. These two are sitting in a local host with one is port ending with a 4, other one is port number ending with 28, and I'm calling this staging environment as I prefix the data with STG, and I'm calling this the dev environment, and I'm prefixing the data with dev. And this one is coming all the way from another remote VPS. As you can see, it has a fully qualified domain name, and I am prefixing the data with production. Since they're all HTTP, for all we know, these three installations could be coming from three different continents, right? So we don't care about that. But the magic I'm about to show you is that just by simply updating some configuration file, how much control we can have on our data. So let's go check that out. Okay, so we have two configuration files, one platform.json, another one is config.json. The platform will only hold our target platform, right? Which one we are targeting. And the config.json have all the necessary data for, let's say, what I showed, the three different environments. It has the dev, the stage, STG, and the prod for production, right? So in the real world, let's say you just finished development and now you're going to hand it over to the QA for testing, and they're going to get the data from this staging environment or STG. So all you have to do is change this to STG, save it, come back, and boom. Immediately all the data changes, the data source changes, and your whole environment changes. And as you can see, this data coming from right here. And after QA certifies it, you're gonna push the code you're going to deploy the code into production. So when that happens, you just come here and change this to prod. Now here, and boom, your production data shows up. And check here, that's your data source. And we can actually describe another real world scenario with this. For example, I used to work for the AT&T, and we used to have two different billing systems, one in Atlanta and one in Dallas, and we used to synchronize the data between the two. Let's say this can be considered that, Atlanta, and this can be considered as Dallas, right? So when the traffic coming in and we had a problem with Atlanta, and boom, it crashed and nobody can get to the data, help desk is getting flooded. So as DevOps people, what we could do, we just first go to our config file and redirect the data to Dallas, in this case STG, come back, the production is okay, customers are happy, and at this point we are ready to go back and dig down into the Atlanta box and see what's happened. So that being said, before we go ahead and analyze the code, let's go to a diagram which will explain the situation much better. Alright, so this is how our config management and HTTP service working basically. As you saw, the platform JSON and config.json, our configuration service reading them both in, and then based on this data, it's filtering it out of these other three environment collecting one and sending to, this guy right here, the HTTP service. And based on the information we got from here, the HTTP service will call upon either the dev or the staging or the production. And once it collects the data, then it passes along to our web page or the application or blog index page. So that's how the whole thing is taking place. Now let's get to the code and check them out one by one. All right, so we are back in the code, and this you already saw, our platform.json having only the platform info, and here is the config.json, which has all three of them, the actual information, and this on the left side is our config service. And if you want to know the location, this is how they are organized inside the source folder. As I have my components and the pages, I also have another folder called services, and right here we have config service and HTTP service. And the logging service, which is actually taking the error data and passing along to the sentry.io service, which I have made a video on. Just check out the previous video on this series and you get to know all the details on that. But here we're going to talk about just these two. Let's start with config service. All right, and as you can see at the very beginning, we're importing these two files, the platform.json and config.json. And as soon as we get the data, we are putting the platform information inside this constant. And next we are declaring a function fetch config, which is basically mapping through the config output, which is these files. As you can see here, all this config data is now stored in this variable. So once we look through that and we match the platform information like this to this, right? And let's make it a little bit more visible. Let's enable this console.log, save it, and now let's go back, and you can see what's happening inside is going through each environment data one by one, and it's matching it with the .env, whether or not this is the one being called from the platform.json. So once that happens, it is collecting all the data from each platform. Basically, whenever we see dev, we're gonna go get all the dev information. Then all these becomes dev.info, dev.info.parpage, dev.info.password, etc., etc., right? So once these are collected, we are returning data, this variable, right? So at this point, we are actually invoking that function and getting the data here. But let's see what we are getting. Go back and let's do another refresh. Okay, so this is what we're getting. Look, depending on dev, because dev matched, we have the dev data, but the other ones are going to be undefined, right? So here we are just filtering through that and cutting out all the undefined ones. And in here, we're declaring a new variable, conf data, right? So let's go see what conf data look like. This is our filtered data, right? So it actually picked out from all these three, cut out the undefined and picked out this one specific one. But the problem with this one, it comes with an attached 0, right? Because it is still an array and array index is still attached. So in order to clean that up, we had to just export the default config data, but we're already using the 0 index, and thus we're getting this clean information right there. This is actually coming from our HTTP service, which we're going to look at next. All right, so now we have our config service on the right side and our HTTP service on the left. And here you can see that we are invoking our config service and getting the data inside this variable called config, which is exactly this guy's information. And most important part of our HTTP service here is the WP API library, and this is the one will help us pull the data from WordPress, the Headless CMS backend. And this one, the Sentry, is basically a service from the Sentry.io, which is our logging system. Remotely, we are logging our errors and everything. If you want to learn about this, just check out the previous video of this series. For now, let's move on. So once we have our WP API object, we are instantiating it and we are feeding it the information it needs, which is the endpoint, the username, and the password. And this is all coming from this file via this config management service, this guy right here, and here is the info that is being passed along, right? So once we fill those up, our WP object is ready, and now we are going to call in a function. We're going to declare a function called fetchPost, which is an async function. And as you can see, the console.log config service config. This is basically this output right here. And as soon as we get the data, we are putting it inside a try catch. And this time we are declaring a recent post variable. And for the first time, we are calling our WP API with an await. And this API gives us this nice functions, which is .post.parpage. Parpage will be a filter. And in here, we're also passing along that config.parpage data. Config.parpage, right? Which is, if you can look here, this parpage information, right? So all these are now config.api URL, username, password, parpage, all coming from the config service. And in the end, .get function is responsible for actually pulling in the data and storing it in our recent posts variable. And this console.log from the HTTP service is actually giving us this information that it just pulled the data, right? Then we're returning the return post so that whenever we use this function, this data will go into an assigned variable. And this is just the catch block. Any error that comes, we display it on screen, console logging it, and we're also sending it to Sentry.io for logging. And at the same time, since our config object has all the necessary information, we're also exporting that in here so that we can use it for other purposes, as you will see next when we check out the blog index. And most importantly, we are exporting the WP object, which will give us all sorts of functions, the get, the post, the categories, the users, whatever. I mean, everything that the WAPI library has to offer, we're going to get through this WP object. And in case you are wondering about WP API library, I have a very detailed series of video on how to operate the WP API, so please feel free to check that out. All right, so now that we have seen our config service and HTTP service, and let's go to our blog index code and see how they're implemented. On the right side, we have our HTTP service. On the left side is our blog index. So to begin with, I mean, there's a whole bunch of usual libraries. I mean, this is the React stuff, and then the next 3 lines are nothing but layout stuff. And this is the loading spinner, and there's a parser going on because once we collect data from WordPress, it comes with some HTML code in it. So if you don't parse that HTML code, it's gonna start showing up in your content. But if you do use this library, it helps you render that HTML, right? And now most important part of it is our HTTP service. We're bringing in the fetch post and the conf. As we showed before, this fetch post function and config, we're just gonna need these 2 now because WP has already been used, so we don't need it here. And that actually cuts down on our code a little bit. And the last one is a load more pagination component. All right, so This is our main function, and the constants, especially the most important one is the post. This is where we collect our data, and is pending is the one that will make our loading spinner show up. And all these other three are nothing but helpers for our load more pagination. So if you want to know about details about this, please check out my other videos on the series. So we're not going to go over this too much. We're just going to focus right here. The use effect, initially we are enabling our is pending to true so that loading spinner starts. And in here, we're going to go ahead and call our fetch post, use the got post variable, and once we get the data, we use the set post to update the post variable, upload all the data into this variable, and we also collect the total page number from the data here, because every time WAPI sends us data, it actually gives us this kind of information that we can use for pagination. After that, we are turning our is pending to false so that the loading spinner goes away. And now that we have our post data, we come straight here, we check up on post. If the posts are available, we just loop through all that and make the data available in our blog index. And watch this. This is where we're parsing the data so that the HTML are rendered, and the rest is just the loading spinner and the load more button. And that's how we're collecting all this data. And just by changing this environment variables, we get to choose our data source among this, and this. And that's all for this video. If you like this, please smash the like button, and please don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please smash the like button and the subscribe button. This will help me bring more free contents like this to you every week. Thanks again.